A thing I've come to believe is that passion and drive trumps knowledge and experience. It's hard to change what we love, but for founders, it's actually pretty easy to change what we know.
When you talk to the best founders, they're just like, listen, I'm actually giving this my best. This is a mission worth tackling. Whether it fails or succeeds is not going to define how I felt about this mission.
You started a company a decade ago to make supersonic aircraft. You now have a supersonic aircraft. Is there anything significant that you believed in the earlier days?
When I was growing up, the tech was where everything exciting was happening. Airplanes were like, we're going to build a carbon copy of the last one. There's no innovation. And so it didn't really even occur to me to have a career there. Could I have done supersonic jets as my first thing out of school? I don't think I would have considered it within the realm of possibility.
I wonder if one of the reasons why we tend to see a lot of innovation in software is precisely because it is easy to start hacking. Like the floor is low. As opposed to in some ways like building for the physical world, the floor seems really high. Welcome everyone to the -1 podcast, where we ask the most interesting people in the world about times in their lives where they've had to answer the question we all eventually struggle with. What's next? Because before you launch at 0, you have to decide what to work on at -1. I'm your host, Aditya Agarwal, partner here at South Park Commons, and I'm joined today by my fellow partner at SPC, Jonathan Brebner. Our guest today is Blake Scholl, founder and CEO of Boom Supersonic, who recently had the experience of seeing his latest product break the sound barrier, who also happened to be my teaching assistant at Carnegie Mellon, which makes him the second founder we have had on the show who used to grade me. Welcome, Blake. It's amazing to have you here. So let's get right into it.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me. And boy, that takes me way back. It's crazy for me to think I've ever graded you.
So, Blake, maybe one thing that I would love to chat to you about, which is that one of the frameworks that you have mentioned in the past when you've thought about what to work on next is how happy would you be if you succeeded? And how proud would you be if you failed? And I love this framework because I think that it's a really good articulation of how some of the best founders I've ever worked with tend to think about the world. But could you expound a little bit more on that framework for us?
A thing I've come to believe is that passion and drive trumps knowledge and experience, and that it's hard to change what we love, but for founders, it's actually pretty easy to change what we know. In fact, any founder in any business, if you sort of imagine the founder on day of IPO, kind of looking backwards, probably 99% of what they needed to know to be the founder at time of IPO, they didn't know at the day of founding. And so why not make it 99.5%? And on one hand, on the other hand, I think ambitious founders, we're going to run at our personal red line, no matter what we're doing. Like, and if it ever gets easier, we just like make the challenge harder and get right back at that red line because that's where we live. And so I think the difficulty level, the intensity is really set by the founder, not by the business. But the choice of business, the choice of mission, that sets the motivation. And so I think there is a almost like a Moneyball type effect where there is hidden leverage, like almost like personal psychological leverage to be had in going after the things that are personally most motivating. Like it's going to be hard. So so pick a mission that to us personally is not worth giving up on.
Yeah, I really love the juxtaposition of the words proud and failure, right? Which is that I think that is actually how I think when you talk to the best founders, it's in fact, they're just like, listen, I'm actually giving this my best. This is a mission worth kind of tackling. And in some ways, whether it fails or succeeds is not going to define how I felt about this mission, right? And that in some ways is very liberating. It's very liberating to know that how your internal, almost emotional dialogue with your mission is independent a little bit of success. Does that resonate?
It does. I mean, I don't want to claim that I don't have a fear of failure. Like I have a very intense fear of failure. And, in Boom, like I think like any startup, we've had our high highs, we've had our low lows. We've had it seems like we have one near-death experience every year. And, there was it's been a couple of years when my daughter was turning 10. I took her out to ice cream for her 10th birthday. And I think Boom must have been on one of these like lows, because I was experiencing a lot of like, geez, for my 10-year-old, I've been working on supersonic jets as long as she can remember, and it could easily not happen. And we're driving home from the ice cream parlor, and I said, honey, like, how would you feel if this thing I've been doing just never worked? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, I'd be proud of you for trying. And, that from a 10-year-old. And I think there's a certain purity of that is, that I think is what we need to go for. It doesn't mean that fear of failure won't be there, or that we're okay failing, or that we can shrug it off by quote unquote trying, but not actually trying. I think there's a like, for me, there's a pick a mission that I care about so much that I will go through any amount of hell to see it actually happen.
I think the relevant context here is the specifics of your career arc, which recently, after the latest test flight went viral on Twitter, kind of famously, and I think a lot of founders look to you as a source of inspiration because of the specifics of that career arc, right? So you started at Amazon. You went to Pelago, I believe. Then you started your own company, Kima. Then you go to Groupon. And then you go and start a supersonic flight company. And like, you now actually have built planes that have broken the sound barrier. Well, so first of all, do you have any kind of like a standard response to people who look at that and say like, explain this to me, right? What happened here? Or is the standard response that like, it's because you wanted to go and finally find the thing that you wanted, and that was supersonic flight?
I mean, I think it's exactly what we've been talking about. It's passion and drive toward knowledge and experience. And, the way I see my story is, I started out being very lucky to work on things I knew something about and I loved. Like I got to go to Amazon as something like engineer number 200. The company was already public, but by today's standards, it was early days. I got to work on stuff that Jeff cared about. And that was just like, that I was excited about. And then like, that was a hell of a privilege of my, early 20s. And then I sort of went into the startup world, and I felt like I kind of lost my way. Like, I was at one startup that was really exciting, doing mobile apps, Pelago, that like basically wasn't a success, and then I wanted to do my first real startup. And I thought I should work on what I knew something about. So I was like, okay, I know e-commerce from Amazon. I know mobile from Pelago. I should work on mobile e-commerce. And then I would like wake up one day and I'm building a barcode scanning game for people who shop in stores. And like, I don't play games and I don't shop in stores. And like, I'm working on this thing and like, why should it exist? And frankly, why should I care about it existing? And, and so I would get up in the morning and like be terrified of losing our investors' money. And, and so we had a chance, basically acqui-hire the company to Groupon. It was like fulfillment of my escape fantasy. And I went up like one rung from barcode scanning game to internet coupon. And it, but there's a certain part of that founding journey that was, addicting. As like, I definitely wanted to do another company, but like, I just would think of those mornings where I'd wake up and like just want out. And like they were the worst ones. And I was like, I want to pick something such that I will never wish I hadn't started. And for me, I'd loved flight as long as I can remember. My parents tell me it goes back to when I was 6 months old. But when I was, growing up, like tech was where everything exciting was happening. And like, airplanes were like, we're going to build a carbon copy of the last one. There's no innovation. And so it didn't really even occur to me to have a career there. In my 20s, I toured a Concorde in the Seattle Museum of Flight. And I set a lifetime goal of flying supersonic and put a Google alert on a supersonic jet because I just wanted to like be the first one to buy a ticket. And so when I got to that moment of like, okay, what am I going to do next? And, it took me a little while, but I was like, yeah, I just want to rank my ideas by how happy I would be if it worked and forget everything else. Forget do I have the resume for it? Do I forget, like, is it even physically possible? Is it a good idea? And I sort of figured I would get down to idea number like 3 or 4 before I found the thing to work on. And like, I feel incredibly lucky. I get to work on number 1 still.
Do you think that you needed to go through those first few companies, or like to go through that pain of, oh, I don't want to do this anymore? Is this what I really want to dedicate my life to in order to find the thing that you really, really did want to do?
I mean, autobiographically, it seems to be true. But I don't know if I would like project that. If I turn this around and say, what wisdom how would I counsel other founders? Or if I could go back and counsel myself, how would I counsel myself? I think what I would counsel myself is go after the most exciting thing I can get my head around. And because like the tech, in entrepreneurship generally are just full of success stories of people did amazingly big things at amazingly young ages. So I would never counsel anybody to like put their exciting idea on the shelf because they have to do something first. I mean, apparently like I needed to, but I think that's like an accident of my biography. I don't think it's inherent. Could I have done supersonic jets as my first thing out of school? I don't think I would have considered it within the realm of possibility, but if someone had tapped me on the shoulder and said, by the way, you could actually do it, I would have been incredibly excited by the idea. I just would have found it implausible.
Put it as do the thing that you can get your head around. How did you get your head around supersonic jets? Again, it wasn't a thing that you had, like you didn't have a background in aerospace or manufacturing or engineering or any of the things that, you came from the Groupon company, right? So how'd you go about actually making yourself comprehended enough such that you had enough conviction to go and actually start a company there?
Yeah, well, I think there's something important that's an implicit premise in what you said that's worth calling out, which is I thought I needed to understand it for myself. Like, one way I could have approached this is to say like, oh, I'm the non-technical founder. I'm the business guy. I'm going to go hire a technical founder and I'm going to outsource all the technical thinking to the technical founder. And like, did I go get a couple people who were more technical in airplanes, that I called co-founders? I did. But I had very much the premise that I needed to understand all that stuff for myself. And I don't think it would have worked if I hadn't. And so the other thing that I think is a part of the story is it really helped me that I had enough time to go down some blind alleys in order to figure out what I was going to do. So like when I did my first company, I think I had 3 months of savings. And so I was under quite a bit of time pressure to go find an idea that I could go sell to investors so I could pay my rent. And with Boom, I had basically set aside a year to figure this out. And it turned out it took way less than a year to figure out the stuff. But the fact that I knew I could take a year meant that I could wander down some blind alleys. I could look at some silly things that weren't going to work out. And I could also take some time to learn. And so the process was basically, the first question was, okay, we already had a supersonic passenger jet. It was called Concorde. Why did it fail? And the answer was, and the premise in all of this is like, I needed to understand it for myself. I didn't care what other people's conclusions were. I wanted to kind of recreate all my own conclusions from first principles and kind of, facts. And the answer was that it was too expensive to fly on. And why was it too expensive to fly on? It was a vicious cycle that started with bad fuel burn. And that drove high fares, which drove poor market adoption, which drove poor utilization, which drove worse economics, which then drove higher fares, and the whole thing kind of spiraled out of control. And so then the next question was, well, how much better would we have to do versus Concorde, just in fuel efficiency, in order to match the economics of a flying bed in business class, with the idea being if you speed up a flight, you don't need a bed that flies. You can have a much better bed, the one at home. And that's a 3-line spreadsheet that you can make out of data in Wikipedia. And the answer was like a single-digit improvement in performance versus Concorde was enough to get you there. And, that was like a head explode emoji moment for me. It was like, it seems, I don't know anything about airplanes, except I did have my pilot's license. That was the one thing I had. But it seemed plausible. And at that point, it was like, okay, Blake, if you're going to do this, you'd better know way more than you know. And so I bought every textbook I could find from university classes. I quickly found that I couldn't understand the math because I hadn't studied calculus since high school. And so I ended up taking like remedial calculus on Khan Academy, and I went back and like redid all my 101 physics. So I really understood it and just kind of built up from there. And I think I sort of spent about 6 months just kind of quietly studying and building things, like building up to a spreadsheet model of the airplane and a spreadsheet model of the market before I really felt comfortable talking to anybody in the industry. Cause like I felt like I had to have some clue of what I was doing, but it was a lot of self-study.
Blake, wow. Okay, there's so much I want to ask you about. But one of the first things, some of the journey that you just talked about is very reminiscent of the journey that Ruchi went on when she started South Park Commons, in 2015 or 2016, where her take was that I want to go work on new things. But I first need to let my mind wander a little bit. It's some combination of learning, but also like hacking, right? You're basically like, I'm getting some information, then I'm basically hacking on it a little bit. It could be via spreadsheets, it could be via little apps, it could be like building something small. And through that combination of learning and building, you start to develop like early intuition. I mean, this is actually why she started SPC, right? Like to basically provide an environment that allowed people to tinker and to learn and to explore. So, I mean, it's wild. Like some of the way you're describing it is essentially how kind of like the early motivation for starting SPC. But there's something that you said that really caught my interest. And I was trying to think about, I wonder if one of the reasons why we tend to see a lot of innovation in software is precisely because it is easy to start hacking. Like the floor is low, right? Like you have an idea and really you kind of have the tools to start hacking and building intuition about it really quickly. As opposed to in some ways like building for the physical world, the floor seems really high, right? Like if you wanted to kind of like go from idea to like feeling some intuition and some viscerality for it, does that resonate? And if so, like what can we do to kind of like get to fix to improve that?
Yeah. I think there's something real that you're getting at here. One way to look at it is that the product cycles are much longer, and and it's actually over the next annoyingly long amount of time. One of our big goals at Boom is to shorten the product cycles. Because the second order effects of shorter cycles in hardware are going to be tremendous. We need to build more airplanes faster, iterate faster versus what the industry has been doing, which is getting longer and longer product cycles. The other thing that's, I think, maybe a little bit more of the founder or team take on it is the gratification cycles. And what is the cycle between I tried something and I get some kind of validation? And in software, it's brilliant because like that you type something into your text editor and then the compiler gives you a thumbs up, like in seconds, right? And it's and then you can go and you can get something in front of a user very quickly. And one of my views of founders is I think we tend to tolerate much longer gratification cycles than the average human. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it's one of my kind of operating premises. But various people on the team tend not to have tolerance for as long of gratification cycle. So something that I found in building Boom is that we need to engineer shorter gratification cycles. And I'll give you an example of, I'll give you the story of how I learned this. So we'd been working for a long time on XB1. That's the first test airplane, the one that broke the sound barrier a few weeks ago. And we had a milestone to roll it out. And, and that was the at least outwardly complete airplane seen in the public eye for the first time. And we announced, I think it was October 20th was going to be the rollout date. We announced it before it was ready to roll out, and the team busted ass getting ready for that. And it was an incredibly intense effort. By the way, we're building an airplane in person during COVID, which is a whole other crazy dimension to the story. And the team was working very, very, very long hours, very intensely to get this done. We get it done. And then I gave the whole team a week off because I was like, they've been sprinting so long. Like I need them to recover to get ready for the next phase, which is, okay, now get this airplane ready to fly. And they came back from that week of break, and I expected everybody to be recharged, energized, buoyed by just like the excitement that we just gotten out of the milestone. And instead I got a bunch of like complaining about burnout. And I was like, WTF. At first I was like, what's wrong with you people? Like I just gave you a fucking week off. Like, why are you complaining? and then what I realized was that burnout is not what everybody thinks that it is. Burnout is not, I've been working too long, or burnout is not, I've been working too much. Burnout is the goal is outside of my gratification window. And so, I can get this airplane ready to roll out and show the world. It was within people's they could believe in it. They could see it was possible. They could work towards that goal. It was close enough. And then there was just a mountain of work to get the airplane ready to fly. And it was indigestible and not real. And we struggled for a little while. And, at first I was annoyed with people, and eventually I understood what was really going on. And then the solution was to break up the big thing into intermediate milestones, but which in some ways sounds obvious. But what mattered is that those intermediate milestones had emotional payoff for the team. And so we created this thing we called mission success events. And there was basically one of them every month. And there was some tangible payoff, like the landing gear retracts for the first time. Or the pilot's seat is installed in the airplane. We ended up with a couple dozen of these things. And then we celebrated them, very visibly celebrated them, and created those emotional wins. And so in some ways, this was about, how do we go attack a very long cycle goal, but we have to engineer for the team shorter cycle gratification like you can get in the software world.
This is so fascinating. I mean, 2 points that I just want to kind of comment on. One is that I think you are actually onto something really interesting, because everybody says that founders are risk loving. But in my experiences, I find that people don't actually know what risk means. Risk is an abstract, I am just what does it mean to be risk loving? I actually don't know. But I do think that there's hey, I can work for 2 years and kind of not know if the thing I'm working on kind of is going to work. That's much more that's much more concrete, kind of this concept of what is my ideal gratification timeline? So that's something I'm going to be thinking a bunch about. And the second thing, by the way, about engineering these moments of celebration, Mark at Facebook did this brilliantly, right? Where if I look back at my time at Facebook, there was always something within every month which felt like a big milestone. And it could be as simple as get this shit ready to launch to all of Facebook, the company, right? And then you're oh, get this thing ready so you can launch to 0.1% of users. And it was all a little arbitrary, but we did a really good job of essentially celebrating these things. And Mark said something that is very resonant with me, which is that the most important messaging and comms you need to do is to people inside your company, right? People outside are going to write whatever they're going to write, but inside everybody needs to be massively aligned on what is important and what's going on.
Yeah. Oh boy. I'm feeling 15 different directions I want to go from what you said, because I just love all of that. But I'll pick on the first part about risk. And, because I've heard that too, that founders are more risk tolerant, and that's never resonated with me personally. I think I'll speak for myself, and you can tell me if this resonates with you. I think we just see risk differently. And to me, the risky thing is spending my life not working on what I love.
100%. It's it seems the really risky thing is I think about this, I'll wake up 10 years from now and I'll be oh shit, I worked on something that I actually just did not give a shit about. Right. And then that feels super risky because I can time, I will not get it back. Right.
So I think we just have an enlightened view of risk, and other people have the risk thing upside down.
That all sort of gets to something I've been thinking about recently, which is the importance of storytelling. Both of you kind of just touched upon it, right? It's important to be able to do this internally with your company, but it seems to be especially important with hard tech, deep tech sorts of companies, right? Because the product cycles are so long, because the capital requirements are so high, you sort of have to just create a suspension of disbelief that is more durable and lasting than you do when you have shorter iteration cycles, right? You can get to basically traction or proof that what you are trying to build is real sooner. Did you think about that as a skill that you needed to develop specifically?
Oh yeah. That was very clear from day one. An exercise I did when it was me in my basement in California before the company was even set up was I tried to take myself out of the story, and I said, look, imagine it's, the year is 2050. And I'm sitting on the beach, sipping Mai Tais, and I'm reading the aviation history books. How do I think they go? And first off, do I think we're still flying subsonic? Oh boy, I hope not. Like, no, I think we're going supersonic. Okay, how do I think that happened? And just like pulling on like all my intuition of like business history and like how innovation happens. Do I think Boeing, after not doing it for 150 years, suddenly did it? Like, no, I don't think so. That's not how these things ever go. Like, okay, so it's going to have to be somebody from outside the industry. Okay, and what would that effort look like? What would be the attributes of the successful team? And they'd have to. It's really hard. So they'd have to have a dream team. So they have to be amazingly good at recruiting and team building. They're going to need to get some very, some big sharks to swim in formation with them. So persuasion is going to be really important. Bringing along airlines that are, like multi-decade old businesses, if not 100 years, suppliers that are the same story. Investors need to come along for a relatively long journey with uncertainty. And so persuasion is going to matter, and getting good at painting a story of the future that people can understand and buy into was going to be really important. And by the way, on day zero, I had none of that skill. I mean, like, when you said I was your TA, I sort of cringed because I was horrible at any form of communication or public speaking back then. Horrible.
Can we take 1 second here, Blake, and can I give a shout out to Stephen Drudich? He was the guy, he was our professor for ideas in mathematics. And he was a masterful storyteller. I cannot explain to you how good he was. And he actually, I still think about some of his lectures and the way he delivered them. And you talk about storytelling, learning from the master. Just a big shout out to him because he's played a big part in my life.
Yeah, no, he was a big part of my life too. And sadly, he passed recently. So I'm very, very sad for that. But he had a life-changing impact on me. And just to tell a couple stories in honor of the storyteller. So he had the great insight to open every lecture with a magic trick. And he was an incredible magician, like the amazing sleight of hand. But the best sleight of hand was this made all the students show up on time magically, because nobody ever wanted to miss the magic trick.
Has your approach to thinking about like the storytelling function of the founder, of the leader of the company, has it changed over the decade that you've been building Boom? Has it changed since you actually got a plane off the ground? Or is it still kind of the same process that you were going through day zero when you didn't feel like you had the skill set and but you identified it as like a necessary component to what you wanted to build? I guess
I'll share two lessons learned. One I learned relatively early, and one I've learned more recently. And the first one was figure out how to make real progress that also looks like progress. And so, so for example, when we were going through YC, we were iterating on the airplane design. We knew that it mattered to have a design that achieved a certain lift to drag ratio, which basically means aerodynamic efficiency. And we were, testing that through simulation. And, we could have gone and said, oh, we have this simulation that says our lift to drag ratio is like 8.5. And if you study the problem very closely, you know that if you have a lift to drag ratio of 8.5 at supersonic speeds, that you've checked a really important box. But that's not inspiring. It's not convincing. People won't necessarily believe the simulation, or like, how did you get there? And so, what we learned was we needed to go find a way to make it tangible. So as we were going through YC, we worked on the airplane design, and then we built a model of the airplane that reflected the design that we could physically point at and explain why it worked. And I think that like making things tangible was a big deal. So that was kind of lesson one. And the other one that's more recent is it comes down to kind of what work we prioritize. And the phrase we have is don't build the demo the build. And in some ways, it's a refinement of that first thing about making things tangible. Like one sort of mistaken way you can make things tangible is to build a lot of demos.
Yeah, demo the build. I might steal that, Blake. That's a good one.
It is. So the credit for this goes to one of my board members and mentors, Jeff Holden, who Jeff's great. And he started a hard tech company after Boom. And, and we've been like exchanging lessons learned. And he said, don't build the demo the build. And it's totally right. And so that means things like, as an example, I'll tell a story. So as folks might know, we're not buying jet engines, we're building our own. And people called us crazy to do that. I've come to believe it'd be crazy to do it any other way. Just the same way SpaceX builds their own engines or Apple now builds their own chips. And so when we first started doing this, we were kind of building our own engine the way that Rolls-Royce would build an engine, where it was, very long engineering process, lots of like validation along the way, culminates at hardware at the end. And kind of the plan is to sort of land the hardware perfectly the first time. And theoretically, that's the most efficient path because hardware is expensive and you can save a lot of money by not building hardware you throw away. And the first thing I realized was like, wait a minute, this is like very difficult to inspect from the outside that it's actually succeeding. And so you could like slip into, we like almost slipped into like building a demo mode. Like we thought about like, oh, should we build like a smaller engine to prove that we can make an engine? And what we realized was the fact that the process was not inspectable was actually evidence that the whole approach to development was wrong. And we blew up the entire development roadmap. And we said, actually, we're gonna focus much more on iteration, and we're gonna get to a whole engine that works as quickly as we can. And what doesn't matter is that it's the final engine; it just matters that it's a engine. We can find out what we don't know, and then iterate. And we kept, so one that makes it more tangible. Like we have like the first engine parts are like on dock. We're gonna like have a running engine, knock on wood, around the end of the year. And what we know for sure is that it won't be the right one. And we're going to need to like figure out what worked and what didn't work and keep iterating. But by the way, that process is now visible progress, not just, in the company, but outside the company. It ends up being very well aligned when you take this approach. And then by the way, when you keep pulling on that thread, it has all these second order effects. Like, so here's another couple lessons learned here that in some ways I think are about, Aditya, what you're asking me earlier about how you bring hardware closer to software. Like the mindset that like, so if I look at XB1 and the test airplane and what worked well and what did not work well, we got slow whenever we were worried about hurting somebody. So if there was a safety question, right? And this is a human piloted airplane, failure is not an option, not at the airplane level. Or we were worried about breaking something that was expensive, either in money or in time to replace. And, so as an example, we had these like custom flight control actuators that a third party had designed and built that cost $60,000 each. And the $60,000 wasn't the problem. The problem was it took a year to get a replacement. And so that meant it would cost like $15 million in like company burn. And we got down to the point where we only had one spare. And because these things are also fragile, and now we're like babying the actuator, and we don't ever want to break it because we'd be stuck for a year, and and the company might not survive that, like a year of unexpected delay, and so we ended up being very slow in that testing. But the lesson we learned was don't tolerate things that are expensive in time or money to replace. And so, in the context of the engine, what this means is we have to actually build a lot of the parts ourselves. Because if we break one, what that means is we can replace it like tomorrow inexpensively versus go into the supply chain where it could take a long time and cost a lot of money. Elon coined this term, the idiot index. And the idiot index is the final cost of a part divided by the raw materials cost. So it's like, okay, this aluminum manifold costs $1,000 for the end product, but it's made out of $1 of aluminum. So okay, your idiot index is 1,000, and so we coined another term that we call the slacker index. So what's the slacker index? The slacker index is the lead time on a part divided by how long it actually takes to make it. And so as we were working through this engine stuff, we would find things where, the turbine blades that, by the way, we're 3D printing, have a 6-month lead time. Like, what? Well, how long does it take to print them? Well, we dug in and we found that like it doesn't take 6 months to print one. It takes several months to wait to get your turn on the machine, and then they were printing the blades like one at a time serially when we needed a batch of 42. And so all this, and then it all and then they send them out of house for a process, and they come back in house and they go out of house, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, you don't need all the detail. But point was like, it actually only takes a couple days to make one, but it was taking 6 months to get one. And so the slacker index was horrible.
That's good. It's almost like the equivalent, from the Amazon, your margin is my opportunity. It's like your supply chain, basically shenanigans are my opportunity to basically, because you're totally right that 6 months is just like you're stuck in somebody's like weird supply chain.
That's right. Exactly. So I'll tell another story about that maybe helps. My intention in this is, one, it's funny, but two, I hope it helps encourage more people to be willing to jump into hardware because the alleged difficulties are just not real. So we were, again, on the engine. We had a partnership with a company I probably shouldn't name, that theoretically they were going to license us materials and technology that we could put into our engine. And we had designed around this thing called Rene 88. There was this like advanced powder metal alloy for high temperature engine components. And we think it's going to work. And then the engineers get further in their analysis and they discover that actually it's not quite good enough. We need a better version. And there's a better version called Rene 104. And so we called up the partner and we said, hey, small change of plans. Like, we need Rene 104, not Rene 88. And they said, well, you can't have it. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Why can't I have it? Well, there's a trade secret. I'm like, okay, don't tell me the trade secret. I'll give you the part design. You make me the part. I'll buy it from you. Like, you don't need to tell me the trade secret. And they're like, no, you'd find the trade secret. What? Okay. At this point, the team is like panicked because we don't know how to make an engine without this, and we can't get the material. And so what we ended up doing is digging deep into the supply chain for where these powder metal alloys get created, and we found the trade secret. And the trade, there was this a public kind of open source material created by NASA called ME3, and the trade secret is. There is no trade secret. It's an open source material.
It's a pretty clever way to hide and make people think that you have an advantage.
Right. And so it turns out this is endemic in the engine business because the engine business has this like colossally stupid business model where basically engines are given away and all the margin is in the spare parts. It's all in maintenance, right? And so this causes you to do a bunch of things. Like it causes the guys that make engines want all the parts to be proprietary because they don't want a third party to rip them off and steal their margin, right? And so it causes all this fake proprietary and all this like talk about how things are proprietary when they're not. But the worst thing in all this is if you don't make money selling a product and you only make money maintaining it, the last thing you ever want to do is ship anything new, right? Because you cut off the maintenance revenue on the last thing in order to sell something you don't make any money on. And so the moment we saw that, we realized we also need to blow up the business model here. And we pledged to our customers, we don't make money in maintenance. We make money selling them. We don't make money when our stuff breaks. We make money when we create something they want to buy.
XB1 broke the sound barrier just recently. And so you now have a plane flying, I guess is the main point there, right? Like you started a company a decade ago to make supersonic aircraft. You now have a supersonic aircraft. Is there anything significant or foundational that you believed at the beginning or in the earlier days that you have changed your perspective on, or that a belief that you have updated now that you are at this milestone?
I mean, there are 1,000 things. I think in some ways, what's remarkable is how little has changed. Like our basic, the idea in that 3-line spreadsheet, an all business class supersonic jet where you trade beds for seats, and the economics would thereby compete with subsonic business class. Like that was started off as a 3-line spreadsheet. And now there's an enormously sophisticated technical model of the airplane, an enormously sophisticated market model, and they all give basically exactly the same result. And so that at every level of fidelity, the answer is the same, which is just kind of cool.
Did that surprise you quite a bit? That it maintained that level of accuracy?
I mean, of course, it changed by small percentages, right? But the first 18 months on this, I thought there's no way that I stumbled across the unlock for supersonic passenger flight. It's just not believable. And every day I think today's gonna be the day that somebody finds the bug in the spreadsheet, and I was missing a divide by 10 somewhere.
It feels like there's a lesson there, which is go look for the thing that everyone's there's no way, right? This insanely hard thing. There's no way that no one has caught this yet, and then just go do it.
That's right. I think it's an artifact of the bystander effect. The supersonic flight would obviously be good. Nobody's doing it. There must be a good reason why it's a bad idea. And by the way, the internet's all in these things. The internet is always full of plausible reasons that things are bad ideas. And the typical form is a qualitative claim on a quantitative question. People won't pay more for speed. The market's not big enough unless you solve sonic boom. What? Those are both of course people pay more for speed. The question is how much do they need to and how much will they? How big is the market? It's not a binary judgment. Go measure the thing. And so by not accepting other people's qualitative claims on quantitative issues, an enormous amount of conventional wisdom can be blown up. And supersonic flight is not unique in this. I sort of keep a little short list of other things in the world that I think fit this pattern, where there's a big unsolved problem that everyone's living with because they think it's unsolvable, but actually a small team could totally go crush it.
Come on, you share one or two from that list.
I'll share one because I would die for someone to go start this company, and I'll join their board and help. Traffic is 100% solvable. It's not even hard. It's way easier than supersonic jets, and it's completely solvable. It's way easier than supersonic jets.
Well, in that vein, I think one of the things I'm most optimistic about, I'm actually working with the founder at SPC on exploring some ideas in this space. I think there's a vast array of things that are basically, have suffered from, this isn't rocket science, but there's just a bunch of stuff that is under the aegis of government and regulation that I think engineers tend to ignore because it's too hard to kind of get that initial kind of fix of validation. But if you just kind of showed people that hey, actually, if you go and tweak these things around the easy things around fixing traffic, then maybe your daily home commute would cut down by 50% and you could actually still go into the office. A lot of people would be happier.
Yeah, there's one other thing I want to pick in what you said. The whole it's not rocket science. By the way, you can do rocket science. People have done rocket science.
That's a good point.
In fact, you too can learn rocket science. There are books written about it. You could read them. They're not that expensive.
Are Doc and Geppetto still the test pilots on the most recent one?
Doc did our first flight, and then he. This feels like a very Top Gun thing. He got called back to the Naval Test Pilot School. So he did the first flight, and now he's teaching the next generation of test pilots. And then Geppetto did flights 2 through 13. And so which, by the way, the 13th flight is the final one. We're done with XB1. Mission accomplished.
Next one is Overture.
The next one is Overture. And so it was very. I almost teared up on the live stream of that last flight, which I got to do, play sportscaster, doing the live stream. That was a fun and different experience. But sort of shared that, that's the last time that airplane's ever going to fly. And on one hand, I'm proud. On the other hand, I'm really, really going to miss the thrill of that. On the other hand, it makes me all that much more determined. I want to do that again. We got to get Overture done.
Do you get to keep that old plane in your garage?
It doesn't fit in my garage, but we're actually gonna put the company in a new building that is sort of mixed manufacturing and office space, and we're gonna put the airplane in the lobby. And the rule is it's a good one, but I think another through line throughout all of this, I think, is inspiration matters. And the most badass thing that we have ever built will live in our lobby. And right now, XB1 is the most badass thing we've ever built. And when we have a new thing that's more badass, then we'll put XB1 in a museum, and the new thing will be in our lobby. And its purpose will be to inspire the team that comes to work every day, that has really hard problems, that has things they look at and they say, I don't know how we're going to solve this. And I want them to go look at like what a team can do that doesn't give up. And XB1 took a whole lot of not giving up.
You're going to need a big lobby for that one.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to fit the airliner in the lobby. That would be tricky.
There's something very interesting here, Jonathan, that I think maybe like even as we think about like SPC and what we talk to our founders and our members about, is almost like there's this trifecta of like storytelling, but also delayed gratification. Because one of the things I think about is that software is very good on gratification, but naturally most software is terrible when it comes to storytelling. There's no viscerality to software. There's very little to kind of show for your efforts because software is almost so dynamic. And like, I have zero connection to the code that I wrote 15 years ago. But if I worked on XB1, I can point to that thing and kind of be like, I worked on it, right? So there's something that is there's some very real advantages to kind of working in like the physical world that I think it can be leaned upon.
Well, Blake, I really appreciate you joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, watching the XB1 flights, watched several of those, and I actually got the chance to meet the test pilots, which was one of the coolest things I have ever done in my career, is be in the same room as the test pilots. So thank you for joining us today and sharing more about how you started building Boom, and we'll keep our eyes on the skies.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for having me. And since you mentioned the test pilots, maybe we can close with an homage to them. Like a lot of people are invested in what we're doing. Obviously our investors are invested, the team is invested, I'm invested, but nobody's invested the way a test pilot is. And there is a reason history remembers the pilots, like who first broke the sound barrier. Everybody knows Chuck Yeager. Some people know that the airplane was the Bell X1, and who built that airplane? The answer is actually really hard to find. And at first that bothered me, but then I came to realize it was right, because Doc and Geppetto, those guys had the courage to go get in an airplane in the sky and do with it something it had never done before. And mind you, this is not just like a very complex brand new supersonic jet. This is a brand new, very complex supersonic jet built by a company that had never built anything before. And I am incredibly grateful to Doc and Geppetto for, being willing to literally put their lives on the line in service of the future of flight. And I hope they'll be remembered as they deserve to be.
Thank you, Blake. This was amazing. It was amazing to have you on. Feel as though that your journey at Boom Supersonic has been inspirational, but also your thoughts on how to accelerate progress in the real world. I feel as though almost like I need to have you back on again to talk about how to help people go through the -1 journey for those class of things. So I'm going to send you an open invite. So whenever you're free next, we'll have you on the pod again. You might be our first ever second-time guest, but we would love to have you on. Thank you again for the time.
Thank you. Very much appreciate you having me. Fun conversation.
That was another episode of -1 from the team at South Park Commons. Make sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and find us on social at South Park Commons. And thanks to our friends at Atomic Growth for their support in bringing this episode to life.